Hey guys, welcome to Journey to Truth podcast. Tonight we have on Alex Bloom, who's a licensed psychologist for the past decade, I believe.
Mhm.
Uh, he is a Q researcher, meme expert, and yes, I said meme expert, or as Aaron puts it, God.
He's a meme god.
Yeah.
There you go.
Uh,
He's the
That's
god
what
of
they call
memes.
me.
yeah. So just from reading your bio, I learned a lot about you. I didn't know as far as the meditation practices that you studied, and you're trying to bridge psychology with the spirituality and make it accessible for everybody to really apply to their lives.
Hmm.
I don't know if you want to touch on some of that and your brief history of how you got involved in all that, and then we can get into this awakening movement next.
Yeah, that sounds good. So, kind of a brief rundown. I've been on my spiritual path since I've been about maybe 14 or 15. And kind of slowly came across different ideas that resonated with me and have always had just kind of this intrinsic interest in learning about spiritual traditions and just faiths that include some sort of sense of wisdom that speaks to our soul. And, I have a background in Christianity and been kind of raised with some ideas and went to a Christian-based high school. And so I had that kind of infused in my learning, but always felt inclined to want to expand beyond that. And then college came along and I started exploring meditation a little bit. And then in graduate school, I learned about mindfulness and finally had some sort of formal name that I could put on meditation that I had been practicing kind of on my own. And then to my surprise, there was this whole burgeoning field of research that was studying mindfulness. And I thought, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? I can be researching this as part of my degree. It was just like a birthday present. So I focused on mindfulness for my master's thesis and then my doctoral dissertation. So I'd been pretty steeped in the research end of things and conducting my own research. And then, using it with clients and being able to see change there. And then, of course, having my own daily practice of mindfulness for well over a decade. Kind of all three of these angles made me kind of in a unique position with that. So that's kind of one train of my progression that had been happening. And then with this book idea that started, we actually have to go back to 2006 before grad school even started. And it was in that, I think, winter or spring, I had stumbled across this idea called law of attraction. And I had never heard of it before. And it was this idea that, we create our own reality. I thought, well, wow, that's interesting. And so I started learning more about it and researching. And then a few months later, the movie The Secret came out, if you guys remember that.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
And
I saw it.
did you? Yeah.
I saw it
And
before my awakening even really happened.
Uh-huh.
Technically, that was kind of the very first thing that got me on my spiritual path, at least, was
Okay.
watching that movie. Yeah. Back in 2011, I think is when I saw it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And it was a true secret back then.
That's right.
Your
Yeah.
awakening.
Yeah, exactly. It definitely was.
And so the takeaway from that movie for me kind of planted the seed of, okay, so what the movie is basically proposing in this theory that is commonly referred to as law of attraction is that our thoughts create a reality, but that our emotions kind of act as the fuel that allows these thoughts to manifest more quickly. And then, of course, what actions we take, right? If we never take any action, then you're not going to see any results. So thoughts, emotions, and action. So I was kind of toying with that idea and playing around with it a little bit. And then that fall, I start grad school. And what do I learn? Psychology is made up of the same three variables, right? Thoughts, emotions, and actions. And so it was this like instant click for me one day in class. And I'm thinking, okay, well, where are the books that are really describing these two areas? And I've been on this journey for 13 years now and still haven't found a source that kind of adequately covers the bridge between these two ideas. So that's kind of where the initial seed for this understanding came from. And then got busy in grad school and had to put kind of the book on the shelf to a certain degree, but was still kind of learning about what is psychology and what does it mean when we look at self-transformation. And so that's kind of what I've been slowly doing in the background. It's kind of trying to find some sort of hidden links, like what are the golden threads that you see over and over and over again. Even within the field of psychology in terms of therapy, there are over 800 identified forms of therapy. That's a lot, right?
Wow.
And out of those, there are a certain number of ideas that keep getting recycled over and over and over again. These are called evidence-based therapies. And in the research, they look at this idea called mechanisms of change, which in English means when you lift up the hood and you have some sort of intervention or a therapy that's being used, what's the main ingredient within that creates change? And so the researchers kind of within this field are starting to really poke around and explore what these are. And so in my free time, what I've been doing is saying, okay, this is a great start, but I think there's more than what's being identified. And so that's really been my call to kind of go through and look at what are all these different forms of change, whether if it's therapy or otherwise, right? Other forms of self-transformation. And so I feel at this point, I've kind of cracked the code and found these 5 themes. It's really exciting because then when you wrap it all together, there's really a what and a how to this whole process. So the what end of things is exploring this idea that we co-create our own reality. We don't just create it. And that's kind of a common misnomer. And we create it with source energy. And whether you call it God or Brahma or, you know, the universe, it doesn't really matter. Sometimes I like to use the acronym GLUE. So God, love, the universe, or energy, that whatever word you place on this, there's an invisible sticking agent that kind of holds everything together, that's intelligent and has our best interests in mind. And so we can tap into this field and we can use this to harness our best life. And so that was kind of where I was going with things. And then when Q kind of came along and this whole Great Awakening movement and whatnot, it added a whole nother layer, I think, to this whole practice. And that's really exciting for me to kind of see all of this bridge together because there's really 3 audiences that I'm catering to. So one is going to be the, like, I'll call it mental health field, or those kind of practitioners that are looking toward making change or being an instrument to help others make change, that with this understanding, they now have a background of like, okay, what are these ingredients that I can cherry pick from and use to help my clients? So that's one, because unfortunately graduate schools aren't even teaching all of these ideas. So that's one. Another audience is going to be for those who are already into this understanding of reality creation and just wanting more tools to add to their toolbox. And so that's kind of audience number 2. And then the third one here is kind of those of us that are really wanting to usher in this new earth, right? This kind of, what does the Great Awakening mean? It means more than just an exposure to this power structure and its formal systematic destruction. It's also about what happens afterwards, see? And so that's what we really need to keep our eyes on as well, that we're seeing in real time, this kind of decay of the old guard. But an important question that we need to keep in mind is, well, what's going to happen after that? And that's where we really need Wayshores to kind of help us create that. So it's a really exciting project, and I love working on it. And I'm about 90% done with organizing all of my chapters in the order that I want it to flow. And then once that's finished, which will probably be another week or 2, then I'll look into recording all of this and putting together this package of an online course.
That's
Nice.
that's incredible, because you touched on a couple things, like the graduate schools not teaching you or giving you the tools you really need to advance in life. You know, you get so far, but then where does that take you?
That's right.
So it's the same with any schooling. They never give you anything that really applies to life, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You see
Yeah,
that?
a lot of that I've had to learn on my own, right? I mean, because the graduate school program is, 4 years of schooling, your 5th year is an internship, and then you have to do a residency for several years. And a lot of the academic portion of things, maybe you stumble across a few of these principles, but it's all theoretical. It's very ivory tower. And my frustration is so much of these principles, even the ones that we are exposed to, are locked up. They're locked up unless you go to some sort of academic institution to learn these. Or maybe you stumble across, a therapist or some sort of change agent in your life that has access to these ideas. But I haven't found any source that kind of covers them in some sort of broad range perspective. And so that's really kind of what I want to uncover and share with the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's great, especially the spirituality and especially the new earth stuff.
Yeah.
Talking about the way showers, because, we do need some guidance right now. People are lost. This awakening isn't some fantastic thing. It's really hard for a lot.
Right. That's right. And it's especially hard, I think, maybe not so much at this point because there's so much momentum being built, because this is a worldwide movement, as you guys both know, that, we're seeing, and Q is just a portion of this, right? But whether we're talking about Hong Kong or the Yellow Vest movement in France, or even more recently, I saw in South Korea, there are protesters who are coming out in droves, and many of them are holding Q signs, so that's really exciting. But what you're seeing is this, a common definition that's kind of being thrown around now in a meme is the definition of apocalypse. And what it really means is an uncovering, right? That we're this kind of, in order for us to move into the next realm of what Earth has before us, we have to bring up the dark in order to transform it. And so that's what you're seeing literally right before your eyes. And with my awakening process, I was, so kind of my background from a political perspective is I've been a hardcore Democrat my whole life. I mean, I canvassed for Obama for both terms. I flew back to DC for both inaugurations. I canvassed for him. And then when Bernie came along, I was a hardcore Bernie bro and did the same thing. And then when I knew he was going to lose to Hillary after California, then I just had to check out. And I kind of threw in the towel in terms of politics altogether, and definitely didn't like what I was seeing in the media from Trump. And it really wasn't until that next fall after he got elected that then when Q came along, that then I started exploring, what's this all about? And then started applying this idea of critical thinking to looking past this narrative that we commonly see of NPC or orange man bad, right? I think it's dangerous when we lump anyone, Trump or whomever, into a hardcore category of this person is all bad. He hasn't done anything whatsoever that's good for the country, which of course counters evidence. A big one that I like to reference is the human trafficking arrests and his executive orders. I mean, that's definitely a very strong influence from Trump himself. But at the same time, I think it's also dangerous to put someone on a pedestal. And of course, there's a very loaded phrase emotionally of a Trump supporter and kind of all the implications of what that means. But I think this is where the critical thinking comes in of, okay, so let's look at the evidence here of really what's going on and moving past the storyline or the narrative that we're hearing from a mainstream corporate media perspective.
Yeah, you need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. And that's what I would say I support, which most people, it's like we support the truth. We're not the Democrat or Republican. It's just we're truthers, truth seekers.
Yeah. We're on the side of the truth.
And obviously we want to see all this corruption exposed and be done with.
And love and goodness and everything. Yeah, we'll support whoever is most in line with that. It's not that we're Trump supporters. We're supporting Trump because he is most in line with that.
Many people would argue with that point.
Many people would argue with that.
And I think let me just interject here real quick. And what I think is important is that it's important to move beyond labels, right? Q often says they want us divided, and so by race, by religion, by political affiliation, right? And so whether or not, you know, maybe even right now, as you're listening to this podcast, you don't agree with Trump whatsoever. I think one thing, especially, you know, going back to the audience that I'm wanting to support here in terms of ushering in this revolution that's taking place. And of course, we see this from wisdom traditions going back thousands of years, right? Of this prediction about this new epoch or era that's eventually going to be ushered in. Well, we're living in it right now. We're seeing it literally transform before our eyes. And what's important to kind of, for all of us to keep in mind is regardless of politics and how that can trigger folks, one thing that I think we can all agree is that all of us are wanting, just like you guys are saying, love, truth, connection with whether that's source or with other people, wanting to see those who are in some sort of government power structure that are representing the people's ideas and wishes, and that we can all live in greater harmony, you know. And I know that might sound trite, but it's this idea that we're all on this planet together. You know, when you look at the big picture of things, we're a giant blue spinning ball, as Carl Sagan says, and a blue dot, and we're in the middle of nowhere, right? And so it's so crucial for us, especially at this pivotal point in not just American history, but human history, that we really stand up and we band together. And that's something that I think all of us can get behind. And the details might differ, but that's what I see as some sort of sticking agent for all of us moving forward. And Q's tagline of "Where we go one, we go all," I don't view that as just some sort of quip or an idea that Q is saying, hey, this is how you'll know you're a part of the Q movement. I think it's a directive. It's a call to action. It's something for all of us to kind of take and integrate into our daily lives. And that's something that I've certainly started incorporating even more so of a daily ethos of when I'm interacting with people online, when folks are going through a hard time, that I know my life is definitely leveled up by incorporating this on a daily basis with people that I see on the street, with folks I'm interacting with online who might be going through a difficult time, even at work. You know, it's this idea of like, we're, you know, the Bible says we're our brother's keeper. And so it's this idea that all of us are a human family. And so when we pit one person against another, or one affiliation, regardless of what area that's in, against another, that then we become more divided, and that's where weakness starts to happen. And so it's this kind of return to a union that we're all trying to strive for.
Beautiful.
Well said.
Very well said.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, and I like how you said, as far as putting people on a pedestal, or being all against somebody or being all for somebody. Like, I agree with you 100% on that, as far as like, it's not healthy either way.
Mm-hmm.
It's not
because
healthy.
It blinds us, right? Then we become you know, hero worshipers, where we start to lose those critical thinking skills. Yeah. You know, I'm not supportive of 100% by any means of what Trump or his administration has done. But at the same time, I'm not going to put myself in the other camp where there's so much emotion that triggers us, that enrages us, to the point that, you know, you even bring up his name and people like have this kind of visceral reaction. Yeah, it's so taboo. Exactly.
His name, it really is. And the thing is I listen to people's arguments because I want to hear the other side. And I will watch some stuff that Trump says or does. And a lot of it is very egotistical. He comes, he has an ego. He does sound like an ass sometimes. I think he does make a fool.
He's very alpha.
He does make a fool of himself at times. But I understand the bigger picture. You know, like, yeah, obviously, you know, but he's not even a politician. You know, he's
Well,
that's the key word. Bigger picture. If you don't understand the bigger picture of his role and what's really going on, he could just very easily seem like an egotistical rich guy that he wants to
elitist.
Yeah, he just only cares about himself and maybe like the rich, let's say. Like, okay, well, when you understand the deep state is a real thing, and when you understand the role he is in, he's in a role that is, it has to be somebody like him, basically, like somebody very, very just
Again,
strong-willed. But I mean,
fixed
sometimes
in.
that is going to be a person that is seemingly full of himself.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, yeah, it's not great that maybe he's full of himself. Maybe he does and says some things that are a little unsavory, but he's leading the fight of this deep state that is this like plague in our world that he is helping to dismantle and take down.
Mm-hmm.
And when you understand that, you can overlook those things because they ultimately don't matter in the grand scope of things.
And there's an important distinction here. The way I phrase it is personality versus policy.
Yes.
Right. And so often the argument against him is, well, because he is, kind of to borrow your word, unsavory, you know, he might tweet impulsively.
Yeah.
He's what were they calling him right after he got elected? Malignant narcissism.
Yeah.
You know? That as there that therefore equals, you know, everything that he's doing is going to be against essentially the American people.
Yeah, nothing good can come from
right.
it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
just not true, right? When you
yeah.
look at the actual the executive orders that he signed and some of the policies that he's put into place, that just doesn't hold water.
There is one aspect of it. So we heard from, whenever it was, from David Wilcox, said that he is from allegedly supposed to be the first president to ever receive cosmic clearance, which is like the top clearance. Like, you know, we always hear there's like 37 ranks above the president.
Right.
Well, the 38th one is cosmic clearance. And he's supposed to be the first president ever to receive this. So let's say he did receive this clearance, knows everything, you know, Corey Good level stuff, secret space program, knows everything. Just got it all handed to him. And that might explain why he comes across that way, because he might know what's coming, really, you know, and he can tweet, he might feel like he can do that stuff because he knows that it's over for them, you know. And he's like, I can say what I want because you have no idea what I know. You know?
Well, yeah, and that's, you know, and once we have access to, and it's not really Q. I mean, people kind of put Q on this pedestal, and Q is just a pointer, right? The Q team is just a way shower, and the majority of information that they share is in the form of Socratic questioning, which is what we learn in graduate school, right? That you can't always tell people information. Sometimes you have to have them be led to it. And so when you can take an idea or a trajectory of where you're going, but phrase it in the form of a question, then it allows the listener to kind of be more open, be more inquisitive, to have that kind of intrinsic drive and motivation to want to learn. And then what they stumble across is going to be that much more impactful. So it's absolutely brilliant, the strategy that they're doing. Plus, they're also, by doing it this way, not, as I understand it, disobeying, I believe it's the Hatch Act of them sharing classified information. And most of what they say is information that's shared from prior mainstream media articles. Or they'll say, you know, future proves past in terms of the news will unlock information, the future news, you know. So,
yeah.
Well, it's definitely, yeah, it's a crazy time. Q, I'm excited to see if Q's 8chan, where all the stuff. What are your thoughts on 8chan coming back? Like, I'm reading now that they might be coming back under a different name or rebranded now under
right,
Coon or whatever it is. However you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like my last name.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm just I'm curious if you've delved into that at all. And
well, it's interesting. So I can't remember his name right now, but the main administrator to
Jim
8chan,
Watkins.
there we are. So
Yeah.
when he testified in Congress recently, I don't know if you guys saw this, but afterwards he's outside of the main building there, the Capitol, and he's having his picture taken. and there on his collar is a giant Q.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that.
So 8chan just released on Twitter a small little intro. I believe it was yesterday, perhaps, or the day before. And Craig Mason, who's one of the guys I enjoy listening to on YouTube, he's worth checking out. And he noticed something today that I listened to at the 17-second mark, because Q often talks in symbols, right? And 17 is a common one because it's the 17th letter of the alphabet. So at the 17th second mark, that there's a little Q that kind of pops up. So you'll see these little things that by themselves, they mean absolutely nothing. It's pure coincidence when we start to explore this. But what I find so fun, again, from almost like a puzzle perspective, like you guys remember Dan Brown and like Da Vinci Code and whatnot? It kind of feels like that, but in real life, because all the time you're having these little nods, these little winks of Q proofs that are slowly revealing themselves. And that's what was so fun, especially when Q was dropping regularly, that every morning it would feel like Christmas morning, because it'd be like, well, what's going to happen today?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And by themselves, they mean nothing. But when you take statistics courses, you know, the whole point of statistics is like predicting the future, right? Because we don't have a crystal ball. And so how we work with predictions then is going to be through a statistical lens, where you're looking at trends, themes, what is deemed or considered into this category of pure coincidence, that it's not significant or have some sort of meaning to it. And then when you have enough data points that you collect, then that shows a trend over time. And then you can connect these dots and you can see kind of where things are going. And Q has even kind of made reference to this in the past. And so that's what you see when you start exploring these Q proofs, that there are so many at this point, like it transcends. We've now kind of moved beyond this threshold of it being pure coincidence. So, but you have to kind of be willing mentally to go there and to be open-minded to start looking into this and explore. Because a lot of people read, you know, the mainstream media hit pieces against Q, which I chuckle at, because every time there's a Q article that comes out, they do such a horrible job at summarizing what Q is. It only adds further credence or credibility to Q because they're not accurately summarizing it.
I have a perfect example of that. I had somebody at work asking me about Q, and I was explaining it to him. He went home, looked it up, came back the next day. He's like, yeah, I went on Wikipedia last night and looked up Q, and it says it's a far right conspiracy theory.
Right.
And blah, 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 blah. And he goes, I know better than that just from talking to you, and it just didn't make sense, blah, blah, blah. But that's a perfect example of the type of stuff that you find if you research it. And just going back to what you said a minute ago, we do have a crystal ball. It's just not disclosed yet.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
We
don't see it.
Yeah.
And this goes back to the point that you were making earlier about Trump's confidence. Because, and you know, an example of that would be like with this whole Russiagate scandal, right? I mean, countless commentators have said if basically this were anyone else, they would have thrown in the towel or had, you know, a breakdown, whatever, from all the stress and pressure. But when you see Trump kind of reacting to all of these things, what has he said from the very beginning? What do all of his tweets, when you look back, you see this trend of it's a hoax, right? It's a conspiracy. It's not founded in fact. And of course the media will take these tweets and they'll kind of laugh at it. And there's a compile I saw the other day of all of these main commentators saying, you know, he's going down and the walls are closing in on him and everything, right?
I believe I saw that,
Yeah, and it was great because for us, we kind of have, maybe I won't use the phrase crystal ball, but we have, you know, a quiet confidence when you study this Q material, because we knew right from the start, right from the very beginning, kind of what their modality would be, the deep state, kind of through the corporate media, what tactics they were going to take. And then we had kind of already an outline laid before us of what was going to happen. And so we didn't have to get all up in arms from an emotional perspective because we saw the bigger picture. And that's really part of what the Q movement has been about. There's really two main goals out of it as I see it. One is, in my opinion, I think it's the largest information drop in modern history, and that's saying a lot. And, you know, if we look into Moloch and Luciferian agendas and whatnot, and how this goes back, you know, good Lord, 6,000 years with this death cult. So information, but the other is a call for us to reconnect with one another. That's the where we go when we go all. And it's this idea of all of us as a people standing up, because public awakening is their greatest fear, because they live and thrive in shadows and deception. And ultimately, from a long-term perspective, truth prevails. And that's why I feel increasingly confident every single day as we move forward that we're only getting closer to this big turnaround. And it's often darkest right before the dawn. You know, people are like, oh my gosh, with the whole Russia scandal, like maybe he is going down. You know, I flip on the news and I'm watching these sorts of things, and it's always fear and scarcity and what's going to happen.
Always.
And then what happens at the very end? Mueller testifies it was a complete disaster, and there's no found collusion or obstruction. And now the latest thing is with Ukraine, right? And that whole laughable scandal of trying to put it on Trump. And they already had their tactics that you see, right? Like with one whistleblower coming forward, and then and it was a trap, right? That Trump put the recording on a private server. And so then, and they didn't really even know what was on the transcript. And so you have Adam Schiff and Pelosi and all of them saying, okay, we're gonna move for impeachment, even though we don't really have all the details yet, right? And so then what happens? Then Adam Schiff reads this whistleblower testimony of supposedly what the transcript was, which was a complete disaster. You know what it reminded me of? I thought of, you guys watch Chappelle's Show?
Yeah.
Right? You know, when he does like or it might be in one of his stand-ups, but he does like the 1930s copper and robber, right? And he's like, look here, see? Kind of what it reminded me of. And it was just laughable. And so then what happens afterward? Trump releases the transcript, right? And now they're caught.
Yeah, Trump's like, all right, I'll release the transcript. And it's
That's
just like the most normal conversation between two leaders.
And he didn't even initiate it. That was a beautiful part.
Yeah.
It was the president of Ukraine who kind of said, well, maybe we need to look into this. You know, so the quid pro quo argument doesn't fly at all. But as you're kind of having this background understanding, looking beyond the talking points of what happens every day, you see that the Democrats in the deep state kind of in general have to maintain their prior narrative, which in this case is what? Having a second whistleblower come forward. Well, it's completely moot at this point because the transcript has been released.
Yeah.
So this second whistleblower is talking about information that's already been revealed. And so, and
common, it's like common knowledge anymore, you know.
That's right. And so now you have a complete flip to now where Biden needs to be, and this is why optics are important, that they needed to investigate Trump first. Because then after that happened, now Trump can say, hey, in this case, it is a quid pro quo. From the perspective of you're investigating me, we need to investigate Biden, right? Not because he's running for president, but because I have an obligation as president to look into corruption, right? So I would be disobeying the law if we didn't look into this. And so that's kind of what's happening now. And you see his approval ratings as of today are the highest of 2019. And this is completely going against the narrative that they were expecting would happen 2 weeks ago with how things have been unfolding.
Yeah.
So,
if it was up to their narrative, you know, he'd be dead right now. I mean,
right. That's right.
It's amazing too, because everything they throw at Trump and everything they try just backfires.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why, I mean, one, because they have to make up things usually.
That's
to
right.
be like, look at this bad thing Trump did, we need to impeach him. And they don't have anything, so they have to make up things. And Trump, instead of attacking back, he's playing it in a very use their own force against them. Like
That's right.
That's very, very smartly. He's very, very well planned out, whether it's just Trump or he has a team, which I believe is the case, because none of it is just like haphazardly like Trump doing anything. It's all very well planned out. It's all very precise, very effective that way.
And that's where timing becomes so crucial, right? From an optics or a perspective for public consciousness. Because imagine if it were reversed. If Trump came out first saying, hey, we need to look at Biden. And then they're like, hey, well, maybe there's some situations here going on with Trump. The media is going to have a heyday in terms of focusing on the Trump factor, right? That's why there was such a roadblock with Russia for the past several years, that needed to get resolved in order for now things to move forward. And as of a couple days ago, I heard this from a contact who has an insider last Friday about the Marines being activated.
Yes, I heard that.
So,
yeah, I saw that.
I have a friend who has a son in the Marines, and he says a lot of the reserves it's actually been going on for about a month now. Not just the Marines, but military in general. They're all being called.
That means we're getting very close.
That's right.
And I'm also hearing, which we always hear about, but we know about the financial reset, potential stock market crash.
Yep.
Right. That's right.
Like really soon, possibly. I don't know. But you talk about
things going to be ending or going to gold-backed currency.
Yeah, things going dark before they get better. Like the stock market crash would be a literal example of that. And it might seem horrible, and it is going to be tough for a lot of people. But in the long run, we're going to come out ahead, and we're going to be. It's going to level out the playing field for everybody: homeowners, business owners, people just trying to make it in this world.
Yep. Yeah, I follow X22 Report daily. That's one of the few channels that I absolutely love and listen to it almost religiously. And there's two reports that come out every day that Dave has. One is a financial and one is geopolitical. And the financial kind of really goes into this financial reset in depth. And so for those that are kind of interested in wanting to know more about this, it's a great resource. And basically what's needing to happen is the central bank is needing to collapse, right? Because it's a private bank and it doesn't, and it doesn't have our best interest at heart. And it was founded illegally in 1913. And a great book to learn more about that is The Creature from Jekyll Island, for those who haven't heard of it. And so you have this kind of parallel process that's going on now where Trump is kind of keeping the economy through the stock market, at least from that perspective, very high. And then at the same time, we, according to Q, have the gold back because it had left the country. And so now that we have the gold that's been returned, that's going to be the demise of the central bank. And so then once that bank crashes, there'll be a little bit of a bumpy ride. But then we'll be able to kind of quickly move into our plan B. So
yeah,
I've heard different things from different people in terms of the Jasara and Nasara piece and kind of what that will exactly be. When I went to ECETI in July, Corey Good was there and he kind of spoke about this. And he said, according to him, it's not going to be one of those things where it's like kind of what you traditionally have been hearing about that, if everyone's going to be given a certain amount of money and things along those lines. But it definitely will be much more of, how do you want to phrase it? Like a positive world from a financial perspective where things are much more fair.
Yeah, that's why I said level out the playing field.
Right.
And we were all at ECETI, yeah, and I remember him saying that.
I remember that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So let's segue into memes.
Let's do it. Oh, my favorite topic.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, actually, they come into play with all this stuff because everything we've talked about so far tonight if you try and make a post or write up something on Facebook or YouTube, any social media platform, it's getting shadow banned, if not getting blocked entirely. The algorithms pick it up. They don't let anybody see it, but you don't have any way of knowing it.
Or they'll put you in jail in Facebook.
Right.
Yeah. So, and memes are a perfect way, which I'll let you describe all that, but just something that we experienced with our Jordan Saylor podcast, just as an example of this. So on Facebook, it allows you to boost a post whenever you have a business page, and you pay a couple dollars, and it gets it up in the algorithm, so more people see it every day, and it like promotes it for whatever period you choose. We've done this in the past with like when we had Edge of Wonder, just try and get it out there. We tried to do it, Jordan. It goes through a 24-hour review. It got rejected, saying that we can't.
You know why I think it did that? Because you had QAnon in the description. And maybe some other stuff that were like trigger words for that.
Probably.
That's my theory of why that happened.
Yeah.
Because I was wondering, I'm like, why it didn't do with Edge of Wonder? Why Jordan? And then I was reading the description. I'm like, oh, QAnon.
well, Jordan has a target on his back from the deep state. Anyway.
And it could also be Jordan. Yeah.
It's a combination of both, probably. But either way, it doesn't matter. It proves my point that it's being.
But either way, it's they're censoring. Yeah, they don't want that kind of a thing getting promoted.
They said we don't have a license to talk politics, basically, to promote, to talk about any political issue.
Yeah, I forget the way it was worded, but that's basically what it said. We don't have a license to promote.
It was ridiculous, is what it was.
Yeah.
So go ahead and explain to us how the memes work against the algorithms.
So let's kind of take a step back and really look at what the hell is a meme. So this word comes from the 1970s by someone named Richard Dawkins, who's a very kind of famous researcher looking at expression of culture based on genes. And so he talked about memes in terms of how that's passed down genetically. But that term can be applied to more than just biology. That it's this idea that you have an idea that's passed on within a culture or a subculture, and specifically kind of very quickly, so that it can be spread to large audiences. So if you think about like inside jokes or certain phrases or expressions, that can also be counted as a meme. Because typically what we think of a meme is like a word picture, but it could be a recording, it could be a phrase, it could be a clip of a song. It's just this idea that you have some short idea that other people can pick up on without having going into a full description every single time of what that means. Yeah. So now with, Carpe Duncum, for example, he does a fantastic job. He's on Twitter of making really funny video clips that go viral very quickly. So that's kind of from a video perspective. So memes, from how we traditionally think about them as pictures with words in them, is a fantastic way of spreading information because of its speed. And that's the real variable here. And that's why they're so scared. So scared that even the military has its own subdivision devoted to meme warfare.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah. DARPA has studied this, has researched this, funded a lot of money. NATO has spent money funding this. And like I mentioned, even the Marines have developed this kind of meme warfare. So why? Then the question is why? And the answer is because they realize how powerful this tool or weapon, if you will, is to spreading information very quickly. Because before it was always what? If you had information you wanted to spread quickly, you'd do it through a newspaper or perhaps the radio or the news. And then if you guys remember well, I don't know how old you are, but like pre-internet days, if you wanted to share information locally, where would you go? You know, you go to like maybe a coffee house or somewhere, and there'd be like a community bulletin board
Oh yeah.
or telephone poles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now we have this glorious thing called the internet. And so we're in an era now where there's so much information that's coming our way, we're being flooded with it. And so people don't have time. The average attention span is 7 seconds. And so when you're scrolling through your newsfeed, you're not going to be able to go through and read the content of every single post. But we have at least 40% of our brain devoted to the visual cortex back here, which is where, sight is processed. And so we're very visual beings. And to some degree, that has been based on survival, that we've needed that. But now we're using that in terms of these little guys here, right? Our phones. So we're becoming addicted to these things because of the dopamine rush. So we're scrolling through our newsfeed and we're seeing things. And let me ask you guys, what typically catches your eye to where you stop and you want to zoom in on a particular post?
A meme.
A meme, right? I mean, maybe it's a picture from a news article that's alluring, that's capturing in some sort of way, or the picture allows you to pause long enough to read a headline. But for the most part, it's going to be those pictures. And so that's kind of the background information. Now, where the potency comes in is that when you have something in this form of a word picture that slows you down to pay attention to it, there's a lot of power that comes with that. And so then the next question is, what do you do with that? How do you maximize that? And so this is where humor can be a fantastic way to really hook the person. You might have a picture in particular that slows someone down long enough to want to say, hey, maybe I'll spend a few of my cognitive resources to really explore what this picture is all about. And then when you add humor, or you're able to mock kind of something that's going on, then you're adding another variable here, which is reframing. And so that's really powerful, especially in what we're seeing going on nowadays, like with politics, for example. You have one narrative that you're hearing in the media, but that doesn't necessarily represent truth all the time, right? And so if you're wanting to reclaim the narrative, which means the overall framework of how most people view things, that you have to have some sort of way in which you can do it that's going to hook a lot of people, just like mainstream media hooks a lot of people. Now the numbers are going down and people are waking up because they're tired of the same message being propagated, coming to find out that that message is now no longer being true. And I think that's part of the systematic destruction of the old guard, because Trump is trapping them in terms of showing their hands. For the first time ever in human history, this old guard is having to really come out and force to defend themselves because they see what's happening.
Yeah.
And so you see with Russia, you see with all these different scenarios where it's like you can have Rachel Madcow talk about every single night for months and months, right? There was a countdown to even the Mueller testimony. And then what happens? It blew up in these glorious flames of her being caught in her lies, right? And so what happened? Her viewership dropped by 30% as a result of that. People
almost
are tired.
Almost overnight. Yeah.
Almost overnight. So there's so much potential with the meme. So that's kind of the background here, and potential for a multitude of reasons. Because for people who might be in this community who are already somewhat savvy, and you're just wanting to find the best version of this idea or this concept, that's where you can zoom in and kind of clarify, okay, now what would be a good meme to represent this? Or you might put a post out of saying, hey, all your memes related to fill in the blank subject, let's see what you got. So that's one thing. But this is also powerful from a perspective of seeding consciousness. Mm-hmm. That is what is so treacherous to this shadow or this hidden hand. because that's the last thing you want. Here we are back to public awakening, right? Because when you have a sleeper kind of going through their phone and they're seeing these pictures and they're slowing down, they're reading it, they're intrigued. Now, they might not agree with it in terms of the content of what's being shared in this meme, but it doesn't matter, because that idea is now becoming more of a concept that they're at least familiar with, right? Because you have to hear a concept at least 7 times, supposedly, for you to become familiar with it. And so when you have these memes out there, because almost everybody's on social media, and they're at least familiar with these ideas, for example, like Jeffrey Epstein, or whatever it is that in terms of the content that you're wanting to get out there, when even if they disagree with it, but you're coming across these concepts, that's being planted in their subconscious. And so what we're really talking about is an important concept that I want to share with everybody. And I mentioned this in my workshop that I did with Simon Esler at Dimensions of Disclosure.
I was at that.
Yeah, that was fun seeing you there. So
gotta give him a shout out. What's up?
Yeah, Simon's my brother.
What's up, Simon?
So there were kind of 2 ideas that I want to share with everybody psychologically that's important for us to keep in mind. One is one in which most of us are already familiar with, which is cognitive dissonance, right? Mm-hmm. Which means that when you have an idea in your mind, you have a belief, you have a paradigm, you have a way of viewing things, and you're presented with information that to some degree perhaps might be credible or enough for you to kind of slow down and say, I need to synthesize this and I'm not really sure what the next step is. You're put into this quagmire, this difficult scenario of what do I do next? You're at this dissonant state. And so you either have to reject the new information that's coming in order to hold true to what's familiar with me, which means what's safe, which is your old way of thinking things, or you have to slowly start incorporating this new information. And most people, that's when you see this kind of extreme outrageous going on and all this emotion flaring up, because they're being called into this dissonant state where how could anybody be against the way that I'm viewing or thinking about things, right? So that's one important concept. The other one is this idea called the Overton Window. Are you guys familiar with that concept?
Yeah.
You heard it before?
I'm not so familiar, I don't believe.
It's so the window of acceptable topics of conversation.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's on a spectrum, and in the middle is this kind of sweet spot, which is formally called the Overton Window. And within that is kind of what's considered sensible or acceptable. It's where policies are made. And when you have ideas that go outside of that acceptable range, this is where like the narrative comes in, that then people are going to discredit that. They're going to think it's radical, or at the very extreme, like not even thinkable. Like for example, what we've all become privy to in terms of what happens with crimes against children, right? We don't need to go into detail about that, but some of those ideas are very extreme. And the idea that these world leaders perhaps could be engaging in these very sadistic acts is so hard to fathom for the average person. But that doesn't mean it's not true. And so there's this fight that's going on that you're seeing played out in front of you in terms of like the media, for example, of how are we going to spin this to keep the narrative that we're wanting to portray going. And so this is why that phrase of control of the narrative is so crucial. And so what happens with memes is that you're wanting to slowly shift that. And you can shift that through somewhat of an acceptable way that makes it more palatable when you have humor. See? And that's what makes this so powerful.
Yeah,
that makes sense?
No, 100%.
Okay.
It was probably the best possible description you could have given us. But I also want you to touch on how it works against the algorithms, actually. Too.
Yes. Okay. Let's do that. So Facebook now has capacity through presumably AI to where when you upload a meme that goes into, because when you have a delay, as you guys might have noticed, like when you're uploading a meme and you see this kind of it's almost as though it's scanning something, like there's a pause as it's going through before the post is uploaded. What's happening is the technology is kind of scanning at certain points to compare that image to their database. So if you have a meme that's on their blacklist that they've already determined, nope, this isn't okay to fly, then that's when people at this point now get banned immediately. You might have a 1-day ban, 7-day ban, 30, whatever. And so what you're wanting to do to circumvent that is you can go into your Paint or your photo editor and just add one little dot of ink. Doesn't matter what color, doesn't matter where, doesn't matter how big. But by you doing that, that overrides the meme as it's recorded in their database. And so at least temporarily, that will allow you to kind of upload
interesting,
perhaps a controversial meme. Does that make sense?
It does, because I've noticed when I try and share, not just memes, but just a post on anything, anything relevant to what we're talking about tonight.
Mm-hmm.
I can post a picture of my girlfriend and I and get hundreds of likes.
Right.
I'll post something 10 minutes later about something like that, and like 3 people might see it in a week's span.
Right.
You know, and no one will even like it, you know, and that one of those people is always Aaron.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Well, it's like they don't care if he sees it. Like the people within, you know, our echo chamber, essentially, like they're the ones who are the ones seeing it, not anyone else who he needs to get to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have noticed that things I share on my personal page, I can tell that like certain things will trigger a certain person to see it based on like their likes on Facebook or however Facebook has them categorized.
Yeah, they know us better than we know ourselves.
I get like the same 2 or 3 guys that would like all the same and like no one else. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting.
It's very complicated, and the algorithms keep changing within Facebook in particular. But there's been research shown at this point that the algorithms and their ability to control that has been so refined that they could literally make someone who's scrolling through their news feed suicidal if they wanted to.
Yeah,
I believe that.
Oh, I totally believe that.
After hearing Zach Voorhees' testimony, I don't know if you've looked into any of that or listened to him.
Yep.
I did a video on that, and it was like Google censorship. It was the title. Mm-hmm. Well, that was a mistake because that got totally just to the bottom, pushed to the bottom. It hardly got any views. Nobody's seen it. It was.
I wonder why.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. But it's totally. It is actually disturbing. Like we're just touching on the surface level. The stuff that's actually taking place within Google and YouTube. Yeah, they're all Google. YouTube is owned by Google.
Right.
The stuff that's taking place is wrong. It's criminal, in every aspect.
Yeah, you have Dr. Robert Epstein, who is a very well-known and prominent psychologist. He used to be the editor of Psychology Today. And maybe you guys have seen this, but he gave testimony in Congress to Ted Cruz a few months ago. And he said from his independent research, now granted, he used to be a hardcore Hillary supporter, okay? Mm-hmm. But through his research, he found that, and he had all these different variables with Google searches, but in the 2016 election, he found that, if I remember the numbers correctly, it was anywhere between 3 million and 10 million sways of votes. Now that's dangerous because now we're getting into this discussion of, are these big name, deep state funded social media platforms a platform or a publisher? Because there's a big difference between those two. Yeah. A platform means that you're just provided this landing page for people to go to post their own independent content that you as the provider are neutral, okay? And you don't have an agenda in terms of banning. But if you're a publisher, that's very different. because then you're now taking ownership and liability for lawsuits in terms of that. And so what's happening is Google, YouTube censorship, even Facebook, that they're arguing that they're platforms, but they're acting as though they're publishers.
Yeah.
And so just recently, Facebook has now, I don't know if they've started instigating this or not yet, but they have, because I think they see the writing on the wall, they now said, well, we're going to have a third party that can review when we ban someone and they can plead their case.
Yeah.
So
that's just like laughing in your face.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
They just like they have their fact check team whenever you post anything about anti-vax, they will.
Anything controversial will have a little PolitiFact fact check underneath it now. Yeah.
One of them, an example of it was somebody posted how vaccines cause autism, and the little fact was, click here to find out why vaccines do not cause autism.
Yeah. Well, YouTube's doing it too. Have you seen YouTube? Like a lot of like conspiracy videos will have a little Wikipedia thing underneath it, and it'll say, like, if you're talking about chemtrails, every chemtrail video now that I've seen has a thing that says contrails Wikipedia, and then it tries to end that debunk. Oh, some people say they're chemtrails.
Well, and what's scary about it is it is effective, because the people who don't know any better will just fall for it.
Right.
And that's the scary thing, because we obviously laugh at it, we understand it, but a lot of people don't. The majority of people don't.
Well, and here we are back to the Overton window concept, right? Because what's happening is these folks, as maybe they stumble across the video because it's recommended, or they've been sent the video to watch, but as they're kind of tiptoeing into exploring an idea that might be outside of their framework that they believe in within their paradigm, that they're exploring these videos, but then afterward, if they see a source that supposedly debunks this, right, whether if it's Politico or Wikipedia or whatever, then they're more likely to kind of snap back into that priorly held Overton window and not explore that as much, right? It kind of shuts down this idea of curiosity, just like certain phrases do, right? I mean, now we have FBI documents that kind of prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the term conspiracy theory was made up by government, right? This was right after the JFK assassination. So why? Why? Because they didn't want people starting to question the official narrative, the narrative that they were putting out. And so they needed a way to shut down critical thinking and independent thought. And so now you aren't going to be considered part of the herd. You're going to be shamed, which is a very powerful emotion. And you're going to be labeled this if you start thinking outside of the box. And so that this is, again, another attempt at them to try to maintain that control. And, Q says, we're in a war right now, but it's a war for your minds, right? We see this every day. It's a psychological war that's taking place. We're in a cold civil war where we're not on a bloody battlefield right now, but that doesn't mean that this shadow war isn't taking place. And so this is why I feel so enlivened by my material, because this is one way in which you can get your power back, right? When you start to understand yourself, when you start to understand how your mind works, when you start to understand, oh, there are skills, there are practical ways in which I can feel more in control of my life. And it trickles out. When I feel more in control of my psychology, then I feel more empowered. And once I feel more empowered, then I'm not going to let voices of fear, whether internal or external, sway me as much. I have this calm, centered groundedness about me. And then when I start seeing, oh, here's more coincidences showing up in my life of how this is just what I was expecting, and it's kind of ushering in this new way in which people can view their life from a very, the phrase that we use in psychology is locus of control. And in English, what that means is there's two versions. There's either an internal or an external. So when someone has an external locus of control, they don't feel empowered. They feel as though all their power is given away to someone else. You see this commonly with depression. That's like, well, it's like the Eeyore argument. There's no, oh, bother, there's nothing I can do. I can't make change. And so the empowerment comes when you can teach people to have an internal locus of control, to where they can feel as though, yes, I can make change. Yes, I can start to take control of my life and move into, slowly but surely, living the best version of my life. And there's a whole field of psychology for the past 20 years has been formally studied called positive psychology, which means that researchers have kind of banded together and they said, okay, we've spent the last 100 years, this is really exciting, looking at negative emotions, right? Starting from Freud all the way up to, this was in 1999, Martin Seligman, the president of the American Psychological Association. He said, for every 100 studies that are published on negative emotions, do you know how many are published on a positive emotion? Joy, love, peace, creativity, inspiration, etc. One, 100 to 1.
Wow.
Now, why does that matter? That matters because we know, and there's a lot of science that kind of backs this up, that our emotions aren't just ways in which we traverse through life, right? From a metaphysical perspective, they have a lot more power than that. And we're seeing that through Heart Math Institute, for example, and the power of the physical heart, and how it's much more powerful in terms of sending very recordable electromagnetic waves compared to our brain. And so there's this whole new field that's been burgeoning the last 20 years of studying positive psychology, which means how, if we're going to have one branch, one field of study that's going to be looking at emotion, what field of study is that? And it's psychology. But we haven't done a good job in the past 100 years really looking at the upper end of things. We've done a really good job in terms of identifying depression and anger and sadness, you know, the big three, and grief and shame and all these sorts of other things. But what about this whole other end? And so that's so exciting because I see this definitely being the next big wave of where psychology is going in the future.
That, and it needs to go there because
absolutely.
When I took psychology in high school, it was like an exaggeration of the obvious. I mean, it was just so surface level. They touched on, like you said, the negative stuff, and we did a chapter on subliminal messaging, you know, and it was how to find all the sexual subliminal messaging and stuff.
Sure.
But it was just, it was so insignificant of a course.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they would start teaching the stuff that you're speaking of, it could really, that's when we'll see the change take place.
That's right. That's right. Because it's applied psychology. See, that's the difference. That psychology is this huge field of study. And there's so many different branches within psychology. There's cognitive psychology and social. Within kind of the clinical realm, you have all these different forms of therapy that have been clearly shown to help alleviate symptoms, right? Depression, anxiety, etc. And so what I've been doing is kind of looking and cherry picking, plucking out, okay, what are these kind of hidden ingredients that you continue to see over and over and over again that show up when you're studying, like, let's say, therapy B, and you're comparing that to therapy A, and you're like, wait a minute, there are 3 ideas within therapy B that are saying the exact same thing, but the author of this form of therapy is wanting to use his own spin and his own language of wording for this very same idea. See? And so when you have that, then it makes it more practical for everybody. Then it's, you know, I love all things psychology. I find it extremely fascinating. But again, it's all theory for a large part, like Psych 101 or, you know, all things on those lines. It might be interesting, it might not, but the question always comes back to, how is this relevant for me? You know?
Yeah.
And that's one thing that's helped me stand apart within my practice, that when I'll have clients come in, I'm very much skills based, which means what's going on and how can we help you? What's practical in terms of different ideas that you can be implementing to experiment, to see change, right? Because most of my training was kind of on that end of things, as opposed to, you know, it's on a spectrum, but like on the other end of things, it's more process oriented, which means you're not really focused on being directive, on saying, hey, let's look in the present moment and say what's going on and how can you make these things better. It's much more looking at kind of the bigger picture and exploring a lot of time on your past. I'm not saying that doesn't have relevance, but when you focus too much on that, then people kind of stagnate and they just recycle. It's like you're talking about the same thing over and over again, or your therapist is just this kind of bump on the log going, okay, that must be hard for you, you know, with like reflective, empathic statements. And it's like, there's so much more out there. And I can't tell you the number of clients who've come to me and said, Alex, you have no idea, like this has changed my life. Like I've been in therapy for what, 20, 30 years, and I've never had someone that's teaching me new ways to do things. So in some ways it's kind of like coaching. And so again, that's why I feel so excited, because there's two different layers to this. One is you're going through and teaching the skills, but the other layer is the why, right? And the why is that it's not just for you to feel better, for you to feel more in control of your life, but to apply it very systematically to this understanding that we co-create our reality, that everything that's happening right now is a construction based on how we view things. And so when you can take that power back, then you're really kind of springboarding, or you're having this launching pad for you to really go to the next dimension. And now if you can have a whole group of people apply that together, sky's the limit. Sky's the limit.
If you're doing it in a positive manner.
In a positive way, right? Like the Maharishi effect, you know, where people have meditated together and they've seen crime go down. It's a wonderful example of that.
Well, and then an example of the opposite is we're seeing play out right now is with this Joker movie that came out.
Yes, I heard a little bit about that.
It's promoting, you know, he's crazy. He's insanity. It's promoting everything negative and evil. Apparently, it's so disturbing. People are walking out. But
oh wow!
It is co-creating quite the opposite of positive. You know, that some people are going to resonate with this because people are, you know, there's sick people out there,
right?
And it's going to help normalize their already disturbing feelings. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that movie was any accident as far as what's going on in the world right now. It's definitely a tool for mind control.
I mean, that's a lot of movies, though.
Yeah, you're right.
I think that's just one of the more extreme examples of that. Mm-hmm. But when you look at a lot of movies and shows, and knowing the stuff that we know, it's very easy to pick apart the subliminal messages, the propaganda, the mind control aspects of it.
Symbolism.
When you know there is an agenda and there is a deep state kind of behind the scenes of a lot of these movies, it pops out immediately at you. Yeah, symbolism. And this is part of the mind control. They use the media and they use Hollywood and movies and shows to kind of subliminally program people. If you're susceptible to that, and especially if you're not aware at all that there is an agenda going on, you're probably going to be susceptible to that to a certain degree. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. It's like the awakening is so destructive to their whole agenda, because as soon as you wake up to what's really going on, it loses almost all its effectiveness, because
that's right.
Then you see it and you see it for what it is, instead of being unconsciously programmed all the time, right? Mm-hmm. You're finally like, you take the blinders off and you're like, oh, this is the game that's being played. This is mm-hmm. what's actually happening. Like now I can make a conscious choice to not let it affect me.
That's right.
Like that movie, that 1980s movie, what's it called? They Live or
They Live, yeah.
I love that movie.
He literally blinders,
right.
Yeah.
It's exactly like
Obey.
Yeah.
Obey.
Yeah. Yeah, Tiffany Fitzhenry, if you guys are familiar with her, she's done a fantastic job. She was on kind of the inside within Hollywood, and then started waking up to everything that's going on. And she's a very loud whistleblower on Twitter. and she did a fantastic video that's up on YouTube, kind of this presentation talking about CIA in particular and their influence in the movie industry.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you guys experienced this, but once I started, you know, as Q often says, symbolism will be their downfall, right? Because it's everywhere. And then we could get into this whole thing of like sigil magic and why symbolism is so potent for them. But you start seeing it everywhere. But then for me, my experience has been the last couple of years, I don't have as much of an interest in watching movies, especially new movies, but even old movies. I just,
Same.
isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
100% agree with that.
Like, I wonder why.
I've actually noticed I have lost the urge to turn my TV on for any reason. I used to, it's amazing where I came from. I used to turn the TV on every night years ago, you know, and I'm not watching it to rebel. I just have lost the urge. I don't want to even turn it on. I don't care what I'm doing. I just rather not turn it on. Unless there's something very specific that I'm trying to.
Well, nowadays, most people, especially like, I don't know, 40, 45, whatever, and younger, aren't even really watching normal TV. It's like Netflix and Hulu and stuff like that. If they are gonna
streamed,
streamed stuff. But you know, again, they have control of those because Netflix look at a lot of the stuff that's on there and that they're promoting.
Well, and look who's on the board of Netflix.
Yeah, exactly.
And what sort of agenda they're propagating with scripts and whatnot.
Yeah, so because it's like nowadays it's so easy for everyone to pick and choose certain little things they want to watch, and everyone kind of lives in their own bubble, but they still are in control of these like streaming platforms, and they promote, and like the Netflix original shows, a lot of those are very much in line with their agenda. And
Disney's got a big one coming too.
Yeah,
but at the same time, they put out a lot of disclosure in a lot of these shows, and especially like sci-fi. Every sci-fi show is so much disclosure.
Stranger Things.
Yeah,
Stranger Things. Exactly. I was going to say that.
Huge. Yes. And certain shows are more disclosure than they are the negative kind of programming, and certain shows are more of that than they are disclosure, or a mix of both. So it's all mixed up in there, and it's not really until you wake up to everything that you can kind of see, okay, this is the disclosure, this is the programming, and this is the subliminal stuff. This is the agenda being pushed, the AI agenda being pushed, everything. Like you can like pinpoint all the things.
X-Files is a big one too.
Oh yeah. I love X-Files though. The early stuff.
No, they're big. I mean, honestly, some episodes, I don't watch a lot of them, but I watch the ones that I know are really dropping some bombs, and some of them are like, it's not science fiction at all. Like, it's like exactly the truth, and people don't see it as that, but it's so nice seeing it at least get out there, like you said, planting the seeds.
That's right. Because here we are. It's just like memes are, right? That you have with film a much more mentally palatable way, right? People are going to be open, especially if there's a really good storyline, to listening to these ideas. And again, my kind of continual questioning within myself is when I'm watching something and I'm seeing some of this unfold, is this a way to encourage predictive programming, or is this soft red pilling? You know, because sometimes it can be hard to tell between the two. But Stranger Things was a fantastic example of that. Oh my gosh, with Montauk Project and MK Ultra, that was huge, right? And different parallel dimensions and all these entities and whatnot. And so I think so much of that is, well, either way, it can be used for good, because then later on you can come back to certain clips or concepts that have become these cultural memes or ideas, right? And say, oh yeah, remember in Stranger Things when da 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 da, and that is kind of related to X, Y, and Z. And so then you have a reference point for people. And so that's what becomes so powerful. So I see that being, so, and then back to memes for a minute, like that's the beauty of a meme, is you can encapsulate all of that within one picture.
Yeah.
you know?
And it's also
Exactly.
kind of softening the blow for people for when this stuff, this technology, when this truth does come forward,
Right.
people aren't going to be shocked because like, oh, I saw that on Stranger Things like
Bingo.
years ago, you know.
Or I remember hearing about that somewhere,
Yeah.
not remembering that, oh, that was on Alex's news feed that he had all these memes about or whatever,
Yeah,
you know?
sure.
So,
Uh, One of the other things, going back to the algorithms, is I know that the algorithms can't pick up comedy. You were talking about the little dot,
yes, good point.
but
I wanted to touch on that.
but the comedy aspect of it, uh, I don't know as much as you know about it, so I'll let you take over as far as
Well, it's pretty short and simple in the fact that with AI, that it can be extremely intelligent to the point that it can predict what you're going to do, like, you know, next Tuesday at 6 p.m. You know, you're going to be picking your nose or whatever. But at the same time, like, it can't reproduce humor. So you guys remember Star Trek, The Next Generation? Remember Data?
Love
Right?
Star Trek. Oh yeah.
Yeah, right. Like humor was something that just didn't land well on him. Or you could try to mimic humor, but it really didn't fly.
never landed. Yeah.
You never got
Exactly.
it. Yeah.
And so that's the beauty. Plus, for me, I found it as being with. I mean, good Lord, I made probably tens of thousands of memes at this point, but it's a way in which you can have creative expression, you know, and that is something that is so unique to humans that all of us, I think, can be tapping into. Whether you're making memes or you're a writer or a painter, it doesn't matter. But for us to really strengthen this muscle of creative expression, I think, especially now on the planet, is so huge. And for us to limit how much fear-based information that we're receiving. So even if you do watch the news, like, for example, something I'm telling folks in my life who are still doing that, I'm not saying to stop getting, because then the immediate pushback is, well, how am I going to get my information? I've got to stay on the pulse of what's going on.
Yeah.
And so if you can slowly transition into, let's say, getting it online, you can still go to CNN's website, for example, and you can read articles, but you're not going to get the same neurolinguistic programming and the kind of zombie lull that comes from these people who are very skilled in terms of sharing it verbally with you with the words that they choose. And then you have more choice when you're reading an article, how long you stay on it, what you decide to click on next, etc., while at the same time still kind of covering yourself in terms of getting information. So there's that piece.
And
But yeah, go ahead.
when you're reading an article, you can feel if it resonates or not.
That's right.
Which you don't really, if you are succumb to the programming, you don't really have that ability when you're watching the news.
That's right.
I mean,
Which is very intentional.
Not all of us, anyway.
To the point that, I mean, even colors that are chosen. You know,
Oh,
I mean,
that's a big one, actually. Color therapy. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, for example, like Fox News, they found that if you have an American flag waving in the background, you're going to have a much higher retention to that audience base. But CNN, you'll rarely, if ever, see that format.
Interesting.
So,
you were talking about creative expression. How
yes. So creative expression. And so that's kind of, well, there's two things for me of why I like, well, there's probably a whole handful. I could have a whole nother show with you guys talking about my love for memes and why. But one of those is it has now become a form of creative expression for me that I love. But the other one here is it becomes a form of empowerment, because when I was first exposed to kind of a lot of the corruption and evils that were going on in the world, I was always interested in that. You know, I mean, I remember listening to, do you guys remember Coast to Coast with Art Bell?
Oh yeah.
Right. So I loved that as a kid. I listened to it with my mom sometimes, and, you know, they talk about ghosts and aliens and shadow government, all these sorts of things. And I was just transfixed as a kid. And so, you know, my awakening kind of on that level started very early, like middle school. But what really kind of was, there were several pivotal moments, but one of them was watching a documentary called War is a Rich Man's Trick. And I can't recommend it enough. It's about 3 hours long, But as I often tell people, I give them kind of a warning ahead of time, and I say it's a red pill suppository style, because it goes into so much depth so quickly. And it was more information than I was really ready to handle. And so I went to this tailspin because I was so new to all of this of, wow, here's all this information that's coming out. And I didn't have a frame of reference or some sort of orientation to process it all, let alone having a group of people that I could talk about this with. Aaron, when I came on the podcast after DOD, one of the things that I had mentioned when reflecting on the conference was the fact that when you start learning this information about how, not everything, of course, but so much of what we've been taught is untrue. It's not factual.
Yeah.
And when you start kind of going down these rabbit holes and sitting with this discomfort, because it's like, well, but that's not accurate. You know, that's a lie. Like a very easy one to go to is JFK and the assassination, and how when Trump released some of the JFK files, there was a document released in there that said, I believe it was from either FBI or CIA, that referencing how there were multiple shooters, that there were multiple shooters. It wasn't a theory, it was kind of a fact. And another one that was in there was 2 different documents talking about Hitler, and how in 1952, I think it was, there was one correspondence of this agent saying that he believes that Hitler's still alive and that he's in, I think it was Argentina.
Argentina, yeah.
Yep. And then there's another document showing a microfiche picture of Hitler. So, and this was kind of tucked away inside of this bulk of JFK files that are released. So those 2 smoking guns right there have you come to this cognitive dissonance of, but if that's the fact, then what I've been told is not accurate. And so you're at this forced choice point of, what do I do? Do I just ignore it, or do I say, whatever, I'm sure I've been lied to about everything, and then we gloss it over and then we go on living our life on the surface? Or do we kind of sit with these more difficult truths and kind of go deeper? And when you do that, it's a very difficult decision. It takes a lot of thick skin, even mentally, to kind of do this. And so you're learning another language, is my metaphor. And so you're learning Greek, and then you have to be careful about who you start speaking Greek to, because the average person on the street, it's a double whammy. Not only have they not been exposed to this language of Greek and learning these different words, let alone sentences, right? But then you have this other layer of now absolute anger, or a pushback, or definitely some sort of label from an emotional perspective of like guilt or shame, or just confusion, right? Of like, how could you even be speaking Greek? Because I've only learned Turkish and maybe English, right? And so I don't like Greek, what? And so it puts you in this kind of box where you feel so isolated, because it's like, but I have documents that I can show you that this Greek language is accurate. And it's like, they don't want to hear it, you know? Yep. And so this is where you almost have to go through this inner transformation of like retooling or reformulating your life of how you view everything that's upside down in this Alice in Wonderland world that you live in. And on the other side of that is so much more beauty, because you connect with people on such a deeper layer. To now I'm at the point that, yeah, I can still do small talk if I need to, but I feel like it's a waste of my time. Just like watching most TV and movies is a waste of my time. I'd rather be learning or watching a documentary or connecting with other folks who've also gone on this journey that you can speak Greek to, you know?
Yeah. I think every one of our listeners is going to resonate with what you just said. Mm-hmm. We've all experienced that, and we learn the hard way, because you do go out with an excitement. You want to talk about it. I just learned this. Can you believe this? And
that's right.
You not get the feedback you're expecting.
Yeah. Yep.
And it becomes difficult, but
and
that's
most people that hear that and are like, oh, that's either interesting, or maybe they even resonate with it. Like, I've heard something similar to that before, or they would normally kind of be on board with it, but they're afraid of people thinking they're weird or crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So they usually will just keep quiet and not say anything. And then you think no one cares about that. But really, there are a lot of people, they just don't, they're too afraid to say anything.
That's right.
In public.
That's where, I think there's really 2 anecdotes to work with this. One is going to be awareness. because the more education that you have, the more information that you have as a weapon or a tool to understand this, then you're not as lost because you have a framework in terms of how this fits in. Sometimes I think of it like a puzzle piece, that if you're trying to get a bigger picture and you have some of the puzzle pieces, you want to have a way in which you can say, okay, well, these are kind of colored together. Do they fit? Does this resonate some or not? You know, sometimes you might have puzzle pieces that you think fit and go together, and then later on, as you're putting this mosaic together, then you realize that those two pieces don't fit, or this was a puzzle piece from, you know, another puzzle, which might be like disinformation, for example. Sure. And so eventually you start seeing this larger picture, how it all fits together, right? And that can be very empowering when you have that. But the other factor here is absolutely crucial, and that's community. And I can't emphasize that enough, right? Hence the, you know, again, where we go one, we go all. That when we're able to connect with other people who are on their own journey as well, that it becomes so much more empowering, because you're not speaking Greek by yourself in the bathroom, looking in a mirror, you know, that you have other people who are starting to learn this language. And that's really where the magic starts to happen. And that's how we start moving in to what's next, when we can start getting together. So there, you know, for my life, what I've done is, you know, really focused. I mean, it started in Destroying the Illusion in Jordan's group, and eventually becoming such a top poster in there that people got to know me a little bit, and then getting this label of meme god because I love making memes and kind of standing out, that I felt a sense of connection. You know, we all need connection. It's a fundamental emotional need that we can't thrive in life unless that's met. And then from there, having the offshoot with my brother Angel Galindez, who makes memes with me, and starting Meme Gods. And, you know, so community online is my point, and then having community locally. So if you can try to reach out, whether that's through DTI or some other source, of finding people who also speak Greek that can help you feel not alone on a whole nother layer. And then going to conferences is another one, because then you get to meet new people and hear speakers and all of that. And DoD was amazing for that, no question. But one other point I want to get back to real quick is with memes and this creative expression. So one is, for me, was humor, that I found that so empowering from a vibration standpoint, right? Because we create with our vibration, and we know that where we are with our vibration based on our emotion. And so when you can get into a high vibe state, sometimes these are called flow states, when you're making a meme or you're collecting memes or reviewing memes or whatever, you're kind of swapping them with other people, that it's a wonderful way to not stay in the doldrums of, number one, the information that we're learning, but number two, kind of the fear porn that's being expressed, right? Oh my God, the Marines have been called to active duty, or, oh my God, you know, here's the latest deal with what the media is saying, that it's all negative, it's all fear-based, it's all low vibration. And so memes are a fantastic way to raise our vibe. But the other one for me, and this is the one I'm really wanting to emphasizing, is that we start to change our internal narrative. So it's no longer, okay, well, here's the storyline, here's how things are going to evolve, that we're able to kind of reframe that. We're able to switch it. And when we can practice the skill, this is one of the skills in my book, of reframing, thinking about things in a new, more empowering way, that is an absolute game changer for our life. This idea goes back even to the ancient Greeks, but reframing is something that cannot be overstated. And memes are a powerful way to do that, because you're doing that, not always, but many times, through humor. And so that's a really big point of what memes bring to the table. And this was something that Simon and I did at our workshop at DoD, which was so much fun. We had a game that we had folks kind of participate in terms of how do you change that narrative? How do you create a series of memes that starts to either mock or make fun of the traditional narrative, or can propagate and really push this new way of looking at things?
Yeah, Aaron was telling me about that. It sounded actually really interesting.
It was a blast.
Yeah, I think that was awesome.
We're going to have the video up on YouTube soon, is my understanding. We took our own video of the workshop.
Oh, cool.
So
nice.
So I guess we're going to start wrapping this up.
Okay.
I have a million more things I could say. We could talk forever.
Sure.
We're going to have to just do this again another time.
Yeah.
Before we get out of here, is there any announcements you want to make? Anything you have coming up? I know your online course. Is there anything you want to touch on? And how can people reach you if you want to put that out there?
Yeah. So right now, where I'm at is I'm 90% done, which is really exciting to get to this point of organizing all the material within all the chapters in the proper order that I want to. Once that's done, then I'll use that same outline for the book and turning that into the course outline, and then recording those and packaging it up and putting it up on the online platform. So my goal, I don't know, I'm careful with timelines, but I'm thinking my goal is by the end of the year to have that fully done. So where folks can find me is I have a professional Facebook account. It's Dr. Alex Bloom, and I post, probably no surprise, a lot of memes. They're many times psychology related or just funny ones that I find. So that's kind of one source. And then, you can always message me on Instant Messenger, on Facebook Messenger. And then, so my website is drdalexbloom.com. Right now, I don't have anything up there kind of related to the course quite yet, but I eventually will. And I'll be putting together a new website. So it's kind of all very exciting. But for those kind of listening to this in the future, those are some of the ways in which they can reach out. I'm also on Twitter at Dr. Alex Bloom.
Well,
nice.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been incredible, honestly. A lot of the stuff was said tonight that people are going to enjoy. So I think this is going to.
Thanks for having me on.
I think this is going to be perceived well.
Good.
By a lot of people. So yeah, it's been great talking to you. And I guess we're just going to go ahead and close it out unless you have any last words for anybody.
No, I guess what I would say kind of in closing is for those of you who might have an interest in making memes, to know that there's definitely a platform and a need for that, especially as kind of we move forward with what's next with taking place globally in the world. That memes, over time, it can seem intimidating in terms of, well, how do I make those things? But you start to get into a rhythm in terms of how you think about that. And there's really just two aspects to it. One is finding a catchy or a funny picture. And then the other is thinking of some sort of short statement that corresponds to that with whatever message you're trying to get across. So if you're interested in making memes, it might take a little bit of practice, but our YouTube workshop video will kind of cover the logistics in terms of how to make memes. And you can reach out to me if you're wanting assistance with that. But I think that's a great, and this is another point to kind of add to all of this. This is a great way for everyone to be involved with the change. And that's probably the most exciting thing, the most important message of this entire podcast is to know that we are at a pivotal moment in human history. And it's so exciting for us to see in our own country, this second American Revolution that's taking place. But even when we look at it from a global perspective of all this change that's happening, and that we are a part of it, guys. We are kind of the tip of the spear, if you will, in terms of ushering all of this in. And so if you're wanting to throw your hat in the ring, there's so many different ways to do that, just by having conversations, even by going within, better managing your own vibration. But memes can just be another vehicle to do that.
Sounds to me like you need to make that needs to be your next online course.
Yeah.
How to make memes.
I'm also on YouTube. I have just a couple of videos up now. So you just type in my name to YouTube and you'll see that, but I'm wanting to get back into it. I really have two angles that I'm wanting to explore. One is I went to Egypt this past spring, and that was a fantastic, very mystical and spiritual experience. So I'm going to be doing commentary on my trip, and then also kind of talking about all these ideas within psychology in more depth. And eventually I'll have my own podcast, but I'm going to be putting up videos on YouTube So just type my name in and you can subscribe and follow, and I'll have more dank information coming out soon.
All right.
Yes.
All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and close her out then. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks.
Good night, everybody. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out Alex's YouTube page, his website, take his online course, make a meme, make a change. God bless you. We love you all. Good night.